I wanted to get up and say a few words and principally thank you all for coming here tonight, and thank you all for supporting the Texas Observer. We can't obviously do what we do without y'all's generous support, and every dollar that you guys give goes to support our journalism and the kind of journalism that we're honoring tonight. I also wanted to thank Paul Krugman, our guest of honor, for coming down and being with us tonight. He's, I understand, been traveling quite a bit, so we really appreciate his presence. And I just want to turn the floor over to him so he can say a few words.
Okay, now just, first of all, I'm enormously flattered at being asked to do this. And so, so proud, first of all, I'm so proud that I actually did, very late in her life, get to know Molly, who is still my ideal of what a social critic and journalist really should be, and anything to support the, I'm obviously an enormous fan of journalistic organizations that are financially operating on a shoestring, trying to survive in this difficult modern world. I'm talking, of course, about the New York Times. But even more so, the independent publications, groups that do real investigative reporting. The Texas Observer is incredible. I'm tempted to say, especially in this state, although given what's happening in New Jersey, I'm not sure that we have much of a leg up on you at this point. And it's just an awesome thing. The amount of really fine reporting is a huge thing, and the truth matters. It doesn't matter as quickly, as decisively as we'd often like. You like to think that you'll bring out the scandal, you'll bring out the evil, and it will go away right away, in a puff of smoke. And it doesn't work that way. It actually takes years and years. But in the end, it does make a difference. And I think in the end, there's nothing you can do more to make this a better country than to keep on working on the truth, keep on digging it out. The Observer is a great publication. You have, I'm sorry that Molly isn't still there, but you have as the perfect symbol of what you ought to be and what we all ought to be. So I'm flattered and honored to be here, and I hope that this helps you keep the work going. Thank you.
Well, Paul Krugman, welcome.
Hi there.
Thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask a little bit about Texas to start with, because we're in Texas, and we've heard so much about the Texas economy, especially over the last year with Rick Perry running for president, and the quote-unquote Texas miracle. I know it's a subject you took on in the fall, and it's not something that seems to have been totally debunked, but I'm wondering if you see any of that still kind of playing out on the national stage.
We're not hearing about it at all. So, I mean, as I was trying to point out at the time, Texas has had higher population growth than the rest of the country because of a combination of cheap housing and immigration because of the border, which in turn means that ends up leading to job growth, but it's basically low-wage job growth. It's nothing, it's not a helpful recipe for national prosperity. We can't all be attracting companies with cheap housing from other parts of the country. It's not going to get us anywhere. I think we're not going to hear a lot about it now because actually Romney in Massachusetts is now trying to defend his jobs record as governor, which was actually very low job creation, because Massachusetts ended up with a low unemployment rate by the time he left. The reason it had a low unemployment rate was people left, was immigration. So the Massachusetts story, according to Romney, which he's claiming is a success, is exactly the opposite of the Texas story in Perry, which was, one state is kind of expensive and kind of cold, and people tend to leave over time, which means you can have lousy job creation but low unemployment. The other has got cheap housing and a climate that is tolerable with lots of air conditioning, and so it can have rapid population growth but fairly high unemployment. You can't believe in both of those as miracles, and in fact neither of them is at all relevant to.
It's interesting you should mention Romney in the national campaign. I wanted to ask about the presidential election, because obviously the economy will play a big role, and I'm curious if looking at the Obama administration in the last few years, if you see any point at which had Obama or the administration done things a little bit differently, we might be seeing better economic growth now, and perhaps a different electoral environment than we're seeing now.
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, they could have gone for bigger stimulus right at the beginning. They say it was politically impossible. They never tested that. They never pushed for it, and they decided that they had to pass everything with 60 votes in the Senate instead of using reconciliation, which is actually the way Bush passed his tax cuts, both of them. So they sort of decided to go with one hand tied behind their back from the beginning, and if they'd done more, the economy would have been doing better. They had other chances. They were persuaded by listening to the wrong people that it would be okay to go with a half-baked stimulus program, which is not hindsight, by the way, as I was screaming that this is inadequate back in January of 2009. But certainly by the fall of 2010, it was clear it was inadequate, and they still had that option. They still controlled the House. They still controlled the Senate. They could have gone for a second round, again using legislative tactics that would have had all the pundits screaming at them, but they haven't figured out that that doesn't matter, that what matters is results. And if they'd done that, if they could have done this at any point, they might have done better in the midterms, which might have left them with the ability to do more after 2011, but in any case would have set themselves up. So there were a bunch of other things. Housing, they didn't even use the money they had. They left the Federal Reserve with vacant seats, a whole bunch of smaller things, but that repeated refusal to take short-term political risks, to do more on the economy, apparently oblivious to the gigantic political risks of not doing more on the economy, was a hallmark of the first 2 years of the Obama administration. And it's, which is not the same thing as saying that it's their fault, right? I mean, everything the Republicans have tried to do would make things much, much worse. But Obama consistently failed to take seriously the need to pull out all the stops to deal with what is, after all, a once-in-3 generations economic crisis.
Do you feel like that has been recognized in hindsight at all? Because what we hear now, I mean, officially from the campaign, is that our policies are working, the economy is about to turn the corner and all that, but the numbers seem to belie that. Do you feel like that's being recognized in hindsight?
They've never been willing to admit that it was inadequate. They've never actually been able to say that. And I think that's a political calculation, which I think is wrong. They believe that admitting error is somehow going to hurt them more than being frank about it. I think internally they do understand that they blew it. And the question now is whether they, in this very short remaining time, they're willing to actually say, okay, this wasn't enough, and to campaign against the do-nothing Republicans instead of happy talk about the economy, which has been their consistent vice. They keep on saying it's on the road to recovery, it's the summer of recovery, and then it doesn't materialize, and they end up bearing the blame. So I guess we'll see. No, it was hard. It was always going to be hard. The political consensus for the kind of action that the situation really demanded was never there. And bear in mind, if you look across the advanced world, we are by no means the worst policies out there. Basically everyone has mucked up. But it has been disappointing, and I think there were a lot of missed chances, especially in those first 2 years.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time.